I left the chapel through the service corridor, past a mop bucket and a faded exit sign, clutching my purse like a life preserver. Outside, the air smelled like rain on hot pavement and lilies souring in the heat. I slid into my sedan and stared at the text again, at the way "Do not trust Evan" seemed to shake on the screen, though my hands were the ones trembling. "You need proof," the nurse in me said. "You need to see a living pulse." Dockside was 10 minutes from the funeral home if the lights were kind. I drove the long way, watching my mirror, hearing Thomas in my head. "Don't be obvious, Lila." At a red light, Evan called, "Mom, where did you go?" "People are asking." I made my voice small. "Bathroom." Air, a pause, then the soft click of him smiling. "I'll send Quinn to check on you." Quinn is his wife, sweet as sugar in front of people in granite when doors close. "Don't," I said. "I just need a minute." Another pause, longer this time. "Okay, I love you." My throat failed me. Me too. Storage 17 sat behind a chain-link fence near the river, all corrugated doors and bad lighting. I punched the code Thomas always used for everything, our anniversary. And the gate stuttered open, like a reluctant confession. Unit 17's padlock hung loose. Inside, it smelled like oil, dust, and the leather jacket Thomas wore on those night rides that made me jealous until he would come home and drape it over my shoulders. "Lila." His voice was a wire drawn tight, and then there he was, 20 pounds thinner, beard rough, eyes too bright, breathing. I touched his cheek with the back of my hand, as if checking a fever. Warm. "My God," I whispered, which is funny because I haven't used his name like that since my mother's funeral. "Who texted me?" "Burner," he said. I didn't want Evan to see it. He told me in pieces, as if each sentence cost him blood. 3 months ago, Evan had convinced Thomas to sign paperwork for a bridge loan on the garage property Thomas co-owned with an old army buddy. Short term. High yield, Evan had said, smiling that confident smile that gets servers to comp desserts and bankers to move the line. 2 weeks later, men came to the garage asking about repayments that didn't make sense. When Thomas pushed back, the men brought photographs of our house, of me at the mailbox, of Evan and Quinn at brunch. "Insurance," they called it. Thomas went to Evan, furious. Evan cried, my son cried, and swore he'd fix it. Then came the highway fireball I wept over, the closed casket my son insisted upon, the way he never let me see the report. "Why fake your death?" I asked, and my voice came out more steel than breath. "Because the money's gone, Lila," he said, "and because whoever fronted it wants the garage clean or wants it burned down with someone in it. Evan's been lying to both of us." I felt the room tilt, the metal walls draw closer. "Did he know you were alive?" "He suspects." "He's been sniffing near Dockside. I hear things." "From who?" Thomas looked at the door. "From the kind of men who use words like collateral." I wanted 2 things at once: to run back to the chapel and tear the velvet from the casket, to show the town the emptiness inside, and to drive until the river turned into ocean and swallowed the mess whole. Instead, I did the thing that kept hearts beating at 3 a.m. for 30 years. I made a plan inside my fear. "We go to the police," I said. Thomas shook his head. "With what?" A widow who got a text from a ghost? A body that never existed because Evan blocked the autopsy? He opened a plastic tote and pulled out a folder thick with photocopies. Loan agreements, liens that had sprouted like mold, emails printed from an account I didn't know he had. He'd been watching our son for weeks. "I wanted to believe he was trapped," Thomas said. "Then I found a transfer from the loan account to a shell company. Guess whose name is on it?" He slid a page toward me. "The LLC manager, Quinn Merrick, Quinn bakes for church and color codes grocery lists. She also sits quietly when Evan speaks in that tone that makes waiters apologize for not reading his mind. I traced her name with my thumb and felt the paper's tooth like a heartbeat. If she's in, he's in, Thomas said. And if they're in, someone else is above them. I asked Thomas where he'd been sleeping. He pointed to a rolled mat behind the motorcycle we rebuilt the year Evan left for college. I needed to be nearby, he said, to hear what came through. He meant the dock workers, the men who talk with their hands and keep secrets in their boots. They're moving something tonight at the river warehouse. I think it's cash. He looked at me like he was asking permission to be foolish. If we see it, if we record it, we have leverage. Enough to bring a detective who won't laugh. Every part of me hated the idea. Every part of me that has watched monitors flatline knew sometimes you push epinephrine into a failing heart and pray. We don't go alone, I said. And we don't tell Evan we know. I texted my sister a lie about staying at her place, then sent the real message to an old patient's son, Detective Ramos, who once cried in our ICU hallway and promised me anything if his mother lived. She did. I asked for 5 minutes and a quiet street near the river at 9. Back at the chapel, I slipped into a pew like a woman returning from grief's restroom. Evan's speech had people dabbing their eyes. He saw me and his face flickered. Something there and gone, like a light deciding whether to fail. He squeezed my hand. You okay? I will be, I said, and I meant it like a warning. At home, I packed a tote as if for a night shift, chargers, snacks, a sweater. The little recorder I used to practice speeches in front of mirror glass. At 8:42, I parked 3 blocks from the river. Ramos stepped from the dark, older and broader, the kind of cop who lets silence do introductions. You said you had something I wouldn't want on a radio, he said. I have my husband, I answered, and watched his eyebrows climb at the tense. I told him the rest in a whisper, each sentence a stitch, closing a wound. He didn't laugh. You don't move, he said. You let me see. At 9:17, a van rolled to the warehouse. At 9:20, another. The doors opened to men with the posture of problems. Quinn emerged from the passenger side, hair in a neat bun, clipboard under her arm like a receptionist for crime. Ramos's jaw tightened. He tapped his mic once, twice. Unmarked cars melted from shadow. Evan stepped out last, smiling like a boy who'd won something. Thomas healed slowly, stubbornly. The bullet had grazed his arm, but the weeks of hiding had hollowed him more than the wound. The garage became our safe house again, though now it smelled less of oil and more of burnt coffee and legal documents. Ramos called every few days with updates. Quinn had taken a plea deal and Evan was cooperating. He's giving us everything, Ramos said. Names, accounts, how they used your garage as cover. Each call ended the same way. Gratitude, heavy in his voice, and a warning. You both need to lay low until trial. Laying low sounds peaceful, but it isn't. It's living between phone rings, between footsteps outside the window, between memories of trust. Evan visited once, eyes rimmed red, carrying groceries like an apology. He stood in the kitchen doorway, staring at his father as if seeing a ghost again. I didn't know how deep it went, he said. Thomas didn't answer. I handed him coffee instead. The silence stretched until it snapped. You let them bury him, Evan, I said quietly. You let me stand over an empty box. He flinched, as if struck. They said they'd kill you if I didn't play along. I thought. You thought wrong, Thomas interrupted, voice low. Next time, you come to us. That night, after Evan left, Thomas sat at the kitchen table and stared at his old wedding band. Do you think he's telling the truth? He's our son, I said. That doesn't make him innocent. It makes him human. Thomas nodded, tired. I just wish I'd raised him to tell me the truth first. When the trial date came, the courthouse felt colder than the morgue I'd once worked in. Quinn entered in chains, still immaculate, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found me. She smiled, small, razor thin. It was the kind of smile that said she'd survive even prison. The prosecutor built the case like a symphony, note by note. Ramos's surveillance, Thomas's recording, the bank transfers. Evan testified last. His voice trembled at first, but steadied when he looked at me. I thought I could fix it, he said, but I almost buried my father instead. The courtroom went silent. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, I didn't cheer. I just exhaled for the first time in months. The house was quiet again, but quiet now meant peace. Thomas spent his mornings rebuilding the bike, whistling off-key, while I returned to the hospital as a volunteer. Patients liked hearing the story, though I never told it all. Some truths belonged to the people who survived them. One afternoon, I found a note on the kitchen table. Went to the dock. Need to see it once more. My chest clenched. I drove there fast, heart hammering, but when I arrived, Thomas wasn't in danger. He was sitting on a crate, watching the river glitter. Had to make sure it's real, he said, that we made it out. I sat beside him, letting the breeze carry the salt and rust and everything we'd lived through. Do you ever think about the funeral? He asked. Every day, I said, but not like before. He smiled faintly. You think we'll ever stop looking over our shoulders? Maybe, I said, but until then we keep walking forward. At sunset we locked the storage unit one last time. The number 17 still gleamed faintly. I ran my fingers over it. Strange, I murmured. How a place meant for keeping things hidden became where the truth came out. Thomas wrapped his good arm around me. That's the thing about truth, he said. It leaks through the cracks no matter how tight you bolt the door. We drove home with the windows down, the world finally quiet enough to hear ourselves breathe. The trial ended, but the echoes stayed. Reporters camped at the end of our street for a week, snapping photos every time Thomas stepped outside. I learned to draw the curtains without flinching, to wave politely, to live with the sound of other people's curiosity scraping at our windows. Then, one morning, the story vanished from the news cycle, replaced by a mayoral scandal, and we could finally breathe again. Thomas started sleeping through the night. I didn't. Dreams came heavy, crowded with flames and empty caskets. Sometimes I woke reaching for a phone that wasn't ringing. One of those nights I found Thomas in the garage, staring at the motorcycle, keys in his hand. Can't sleep? I asked. Just thinking, he said, about what comes next. He wanted to rebuild the garage properly this time. Legitimate business, new name, no ghosts. I wanted something smaller, a garden, maybe, something that wouldn't explode or lie. We compromised. By spring, the Merrick Auto and Repair sign hung straight again, letters painted clean. Customers returned one by one, the brave first, then the loyal ones who never really believed he'd died. The smell of motor oil and coffee filled the air again. Evan worked there now, quieter than before. He didn't ask for forgiveness, and we didn't offer it outright. But sometimes I caught Thomas watching him, pride and pain braided together, and thought, maybe this is what forgiveness looks like. Work, not words. One afternoon, Evan handed me an envelope. For you, he said. Inside were the last of the restitution checks from the seized accounts, blood money turned into restitution. I set them on the counter untouched. We'll use it for something honest, I said. Scholarships, maybe. For kids who don't have second chances, Evan nodded. That sounds right. That night, over dinner, Thomas raised his glass of iced tea. To second chances, he said, and to knowing when to stop pretending. The clink of our glasses sounded like punctuation at the end of a long, unfinished sentence. Weeks later, I got a letter from Quinn, sent through her lawyer. Just one line. "You'll never stop wondering if it's over." She was wrong. I had already decided that wondering was part of living, and I could live with that. I kept the letter in a drawer, not as a threat, but as proof that fear no longer owned me. When storms rattled the house at night, I'd take it out, read it once, and then look at Thomas, asleep beside me, alive and real. That was enough. A year passed before we went back to the river together. The old warehouse was sealed now, windows boarded, but the water still moved with the same quiet rhythm. I dropped a single white lily in, watched it drift toward the sea. "For what we lost," I said, "and for what we found." Thomas slipped his hand into mine. "If you hadn't answered that text—" "Don't," I cut in softly. "We did what we had to." The sun sank low, burning gold across the water. For the first time, I felt the story closing, not ending, but settling. When we got home, the answering machine blinked. "Ramos again." "Case is over," his voice said. "All appeals denied. You're both officially free." I replayed it twice before Thomas came in. "You hear that?" I said. "Free." He smiled, a little tired, a lot grateful. "Guess we better figure out what to do with it." "Maybe," I said. "We just live." That night, the house felt different, lighter somehow. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching headlights pass and fade, and realized that the quiet finally sounded like peace, not absence. Months passed before the world began to feel normal again. The mornings no longer tasted like adrenaline. Thomas's arm healed, and he started teaching small engine repair at the local vocational school. I watched him come home with grease on his hands and stories in his voice, and I realized I'd fallen in love with the living man all over again, not the memory of who I'd almost buried. Evan visited on Sundays with a quiet humility that made me ache. He'd bring groceries, mow the lawn, fix things that didn't need fixing, always searching for forgiveness in small, silent ways. One afternoon, I found him in the garage staring at an old photo, Thomas holding him up on his first bike. "He looks proud," Evan said softly. "He was," I answered. "Still is." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I don't know if I'll ever deserve another chance." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Deserving it isn't the point. Doing better is." He smiled faintly. "That sounds like something Dad would say." "He taught me well," I replied. Later that evening, while Thomas tuned an engine, the radio played a news segment about the case. The anchor mentioned how the ring had defrauded dozens of families across state lines, using real estate and fake deaths to launder millions. I muted it. We didn't need the world to remind us what we already knew, that evil doesn't look like monsters. It looks like people who smile at your dinner table. That night, as rain ticked on the windows, Thomas asked, "You think we'll ever tell the full story?" "No," I said. "Some stories work better as warnings." He looked at me thoughtfully. "Maybe we write it down anyway." For Evan's kids, one day, I laughed. "Let's make sure he survives parenthood first." In May, Ramos visited with his family. His little girl ran through our yard chasing fireflies, while he grilled on our patio, joking about how we'd ruined his belief that retirees were boring. "You two took down an interstate fraud ring," he said. "You know that, right?" "We just answered the phone," Thomas replied. "And the rest?" "We didn't hang up," I said. Ramos smiled. "That's the difference between victims and survivors." When the fireflies dimmed and the night cooled, he leaned close. "FB," eyes closing the file. "You're safe now?" I nodded but didn't say what I felt. Safety is a choice you remake every day. Summer came bright and steady, and life folded into routine again. I started tending a garden behind the garage, rows of tomatoes, basil, and lilies, because I wanted to turn something once tied to grief into beauty. Thomas teased me about my therapy plants until he realized I was serious. "You named them," he said, amused. "They're good listeners," I told him. Evan began helping at the community center, teaching financial literacy classes. "Irony's not lost on me," he said once. "Maybe it's redemption," I answered. He smiled at that, a real one this time. One humid evening, we hosted a small barbecue for the neighborhood. People brought dishes, laughter, gossip. It was the first time since the funeral that our yard felt like home again. As the sun set, a neighbor raised a glass. "To second chances," she called. Everyone cheered. I caught Thomas's eye, and in that look was everything: loss, forgiveness, the strange grace of survival. When the guests left and the lights dimmed, we sat together on the porch swing. Crickets hummed, and the air smelled like cut grass and charcoal. "It's funny," Thomas said, "how life sneaks back in when you stop guarding the door." I leaned against him. It was always knocking. We just finally let it. He turned to me. "You still get scared?" "Sometimes," I said. "But it passes. Fear's just love without somewhere to go." In the distance, a freight train rumbled by, its whistle soft and low. For a moment, we sat in silence, listening to it fade. Then Thomas spoke again. "You ever think about that first text?" "Every day," I said. "And I still don't know which part saved us, the message or the fact that I believed it." He smiled. "Maybe both." As the stars came out, I realized we had finally reached the other side of the story. Not happily ever after, but peace enough to breathe, love enough to stay. And sometimes that's all a resurrection needs. Autumn settled in quietly, painting the town in copper and smoke. The trial had become a headline from last year, something people whispered about when they thought we couldn't hear. Thomas grew a beard and joked that it made him look distinguished. I let my hair go silver and stopped apologizing for it. Life had weathered us, but it had also made us honest. Evan started seeing someone new, a woman named Claire who worked at the library. She had kind eyes and an unhurried laugh. The first time he brought her for dinner, I could see the nerves in his posture. "She knows everything," he said, before ringing the bell, "the whole story." When I opened the door, Claire handed me a bouquet of lilies. "I heard you like these," she said. "They're your miracle flowers." Thomas grinned. "You've been briefed." Dinner was simple: roast chicken, potatoes, a pie I'd baked to keep my hands busy. For once, conversation flowed easily. When Evan told Claire how the garage came back from ruin, she reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I saw something in that gesture: steady, quiet trust. And I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for years. After they left, Thomas said, "Maybe he's finally found someone who loves him for the right reasons." I nodded. "Maybe this time, love means safety." That winter, the town honored us at a small ceremony. They called it Community Courage Night, though Thomas kept muttering he hadn't done anything heroic. Ramos gave a short speech, more heartfelt than polished. "Courage isn't about guns or badges," he said. "It's about people who refuse to give up on the truth." When he handed me the plaque, I saw Thomas's eyes glisten. Later, back home, I placed it on the mantel beside our wedding photo and the folded flag from his fake funeral. "Proof," I said softly. "Of what?" Thomas asked. "That some resurrections are worth remembering." In February, the first daffodils pushed through frost near the garden. I stood there one morning, coffee steaming in my hands, and realized the fear had finally faded into memory. The phone didn't make me flinch anymore. The knock at the door didn't tighten my chest. The world had gone on, and so had we. On our 40th anniversary, Thomas and I drove to the coast. The ocean was rough that day, gray and endless, but it suited us, steady, scarred, alive. We walked the shoreline until the wind tangled my hair and the salt stung our faces. "You remember what you said that night?" Thomas asked. "Which one?" "When you found me in the storage unit." I smiled. I said, "My God." He nodded. "And you still meant it." Every word. We scattered a handful of lilies into the surf, letting the waves take them. "For every false goodbye," I whispered. He took my hand, fingers calloused and warm. "And every second chance," he added. We sat on the sand until sunset turned the water gold. Thomas leaned back on his elbows, watching the horizon. "If you hadn't answered that message, you'd still be dead," I said, half joking. "Maybe," he replied. "Or maybe you'd still be asleep." Driving home, headlights washed across our faces, in rhythm with the road. The radio played an old song from when we were young, one of those melodies that carry time in them. I hummed along, off key, and Thomas laughed. "Still can't find the note?" "Still don't care," I said. When we reached town, the streetlights flickered on, casting the garage in amber glow. Evan's car was parked outside. Through the window, I saw him teaching a boy how to hold a wrench. "His apprentice," Thomas said softly. "He's good with kids." I smiled. "Maybe that's the final repair." We sat in the car a moment longer, listening to the distant hum of life. Engines, laughter, a dog barking somewhere. "Feels different, doesn't it?" Thomas asked. "It feels finished," I said. "Not over?" Just right inside, the house was warm. The garden outside rustled in the wind, the lilies standing tall even in the dark. I turned off the porch light and whispered the words that had carried me through everything. "I'm alive. Don't trust the dark." Then I joined my husband at the table, poured 2 cups of tea, and let the silence settle. Not the silence of fear, but of peace earned honestly. A year later, the house had grown quieter again, but it was a different kind of quiet, one filled with peace instead of dread. The garden had exploded with color. Lilies climbed the fence, yellow and white like sunlight frozen in petals. Thomas had taken to reading on the porch each morning, his glasses sliding down his nose, the newspaper trembling in his hands when he laughed. I started writing. Not a book. Not yet. Just a collection of memories that might one day become something worth leaving behind. Evan married Claire that spring. The ceremony was small, simple, held in the same church where we'd once buried a coffin full of nothing. When I walked into the sanctuary, my knees wobbled at the sight of that familiar aisle. Thomas squeezed my hand. "This time," he whispered, "we're walking toward life." And we did. Evan's eyes filled when he saw his father waiting by the altar. There were no speeches about forgiveness or tragedy, just love, quiet, earned, real. Afterward, as the guests drifted out into the sunlight, Ramos pulled me aside. "You ever wonder if it's really over?" he asked. I hesitated. Sometimes. "Why?" He glanced toward the parking lot, where a dark SUV lingered longer than it should have. "Because bad people don't like losing." My stomach tightened. "You think there's someone left?" Ramos's jaw flexed. "There's always someone left. Just promise me you'll keep your eyes open." That night, I told Thomas about the SUV. He sighed. "We can't live scared forever, Lila." "I know," I said, "but maybe we can live prepared." We installed new locks, upgraded the security cameras, small defenses that felt like talismans against the past. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name, typed neatly. Inside was a single photograph. The old storage unit, its door rolled halfway up. Scrawled on the back were 3 words. "You missed one." My pulse stumbled. Thomas studied it, frowning. "Could be a prank." "Or a warning," I said. From who? Someone who still wants what they lost. He slid the photo into an envelope and tucked it into the safe. Then we stay ready. His voice was calm, but I could see the old fire behind his eyes. The same man who had faked his death to protect his family wasn't going to hide again. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain whispered against the windows, the clock ticked like a heartbeat, and every creak in the house felt like a memory returning to test me. I went to the porch and sat with a blanket, breathing in the damp night air. The world outside was still, too still. Then, from the darkness near the street, a figure moved. Just a man walking a dog, maybe, or maybe not. I waited until he passed beneath the streetlight. It was no one I recognized, but as he turned the corner, a flash of metal caught the light. Something small, reflective, like a key. In the morning, there was an envelope on the porch swing. No footprints in the dew, just the envelope. Inside was a USB drive. Thomas turned it over in his hand. "You think it's from them? Or for us?" I said. We plugged it into his laptop. A single file appeared, unnamed. When we opened it, there was a video, grainy security footage from somewhere unfamiliar. The date stamp was recent. In the corner of the frame, a woman sat at a diner counter, stirring her coffee. She looked up once, straight into the camera, and smiled. It was Quinn. She wasn't in prison anymore. The clip ended there. No context, no message. Just her face and that cold, deliberate smile. Thomas sat back, exhaling hard. "Conditional release?" he guessed. "No," I said quietly. "A reminder." He closed the laptop slowly, like sealing a wound. "What do we do?" I reached for his hand. "We live," I said. "But we don't forget. We never learned who sent the footage. The police traced the postmark to another state, but the trail went cold. Maybe Quinn wanted to remind us she still existed. Maybe she wanted to see if we'd flinch. We didn't. Instead, I finished my writing. The last line I typed read, "Sometimes survival isn't about escaping death. It's about learning to stay alive after it finds you." Months later, a publisher asked if I'd consider turning my notes into a memoir. I said maybe. What I really wanted was for people to understand that truth isn't something you chase. It's something that finds you when you stop pretending. Now, every year on the anniversary of Thomas's funeral, we drive to the river and release a single lily into the water. Not for mourning, but for memory. For the part of ourselves that refused to die. And sometimes, when the current carries it out of sight, I imagine someone, somewhere, watching, waiting, and realizing that this family doesn't scare easily anymore. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, remember this. You are not defined by what they did to you, but by how you stand after it. And if you're still listening, subscribe, share this story, and tell me, where are you watching from? Because sometimes the people who need to hear it most are already closer than you think.